After hundreds of buyer showings and seller conversations every year, there's one disconnect I see more than anything else, and it has nothing to do with taste. It has everything to do with financial position. Sellers think that buyers are being picky, and buyers think that sellers are being unrealistic, but most of the time, neither is wrong. They're just starting in completely different financial realities. And today I want to talk to you about those realities and what they mean for your home sale. There is a wealth and age gap between buyers and sellers that no one wants to talk about. Did you know that the average first-time home buyer is around 40 years old now in the United States? And that's not because they waited to buy. It's because it's taking them that long to save, to qualify, and to compete in order to buy your home. At the same time, the average seller is over 60 years old, which means that sellers typically bought when prices were a lot lower. They've owned the home for decades, and they have a ton of equity, which gives them a lot of flexibility when it comes to selling the house. So before a buyer even walks through the front door of your house, you have to know that they're separated by decades of financial progress from the typical seller. And that gap explains almost every disagreement I see around price, around condition, and around expectations with the sale. Most sellers I work with have owned their home for a long time. 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 30 or more. And they benefit from appreciation over time. They've paid down their mortgage substantially, and their income has probably gone up over time. When sellers look at their house, they see lots of options and flexibility. When they see their worn out carpet, they think, well, it's just cosmetic. Or they see a bathroom that needs some updates, and they feel like that's not a huge project. Or maybe a half-finished project just feels like a weekend to knock it out. And from this side of the table, all of those repairs feel really manageable. Now, from the buyer's perspective, it's not entirely that way. This buyer didn't just wake up one weekend and decide to go buy a house. They waited years to get here. They're draining their savings account for a down payment, and they're probably borrowing some money from their parents in order to even close the deal. These people have stretched to qualify at today's rates, and they're stepping into one of the highest monthly payments they've ever had. And here's the part that sellers almost never see. Buyers today are spending 30 to 40% of their take-home income on housing. That's before utilities, before maintenance, before repairs, or anything that has to get done at the house. They don't have equity yet, they're buying it. And they don't have the cash reserves, they just spent them. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone close with $500 in their bank account. They don't have the flexibility, so they need predictability because their margin is razor thin. What feels like a $100 decision to a seller feels like a $5,000 decision to a buyer. A new front door to a seller is an easy swap, but for a buyer, it's another expense they have to make after closing. An old carpet to a seller might still be usable, but to a buyer, it's something they'll have to replace or they'll have to live with every single day. A half-finished project to a seller is simple, but to a buyer, it's uncertainty, time, stress, and money that they don't have. Sellers evaluate repairs based on convenience, while buyers evaluate repairs based on financial risk. I hear sellers all the time talking about leaving their home as is so that the buyers can make it their own. The problem with this thought process is that most buyers can't see past the current condition of the home. They walk in thinking about trade-offs. Every flaw they see isn't judged by itself, it's judged against all the homes they've already seen. So they're constantly asking one question: what else could I buy for this price that doesn't need this work? And when your home requires more financial or emotional energy than the alternatives, buyers don't just negotiate, they move on to the next house. The next thing I hear sellers say is, well, we'll just price it accordingly. But buyers don't price repairs line by line. They price stress, they price uncertainty, and they price delay. How long is this going to take, and what is it going to cost me once I purchase the house? And when a buyer is already spending a third or more of their income on housing, their tolerance for surprises and those projects is really low. A home that feels like work must feel like a clear value, not just a fair price. And most sellers underestimate how steep that discount feels from the buyer side. Now I want to talk about the shift that actually creates demand, because the goal when we're listing your house isn't perfection, it's alignment. The sellers who win stop asking, what would this cost me to fix? And they start asking, how does this feel to someone buying it today? Someone that's stressed out, that doesn't have a lot of cash. How is it going to feel to them? When you close that financial perception gap between the buyer and the seller, that's when you create demand. And demand, not belief, is what protects your equity. So if you're thinking about selling, the question isn't, is my house nice? The question is, how will today's buyer experience my house? Because the gap between what feels small to you and what feels risky to to them is where equity is either protected or lost. And that's exactly why we built something called the Prep for Profit quiz. It's a simple assessment that helps you identify what actually matters to buyers in today's market, what improvements can create real leverage, what you can safely ignore, and where you might be unintentionally losing demand. It's not about renovating everything. It's about knowing what moves the needle and what doesn't. If you're even 6 to 12 months out from selling, take the quiz now because it'll give you clarity on where your home stands and what would create the strongest first impression when you're ready. I'll put the link in the description below because the sellers who win aren't the ones who guess, they're the ones who prepare strategically. And preparation is what creates profit.